Hello, I'm Peter Dawe, and today I'm going to talk about something that I find particularly difficult, and that is the future of mankind over the next 30-ish years. The reason it's a hard subject is, in my view, the next 30 years are going to be some of the most challenging for society ever. Where we find ourselves in 2019 is at the peak of everything. There are 8 billion people on the planet, far more than we've ever done. We're growing food at a rate that we've never done before. We are consuming energy in a way we've never done before. And overall, we are living a life that has never been had before. I typically describe that most people in the West live lives that princes would have dreamed of in the 19th century. Our health, our food, our travel, our entertainment are all totally amazing. The question that has been worrying a lot of people over the last few years is this sustainable? And my conclusion is that it isn't. Or at least, what isn't sustainable is for us to have ever more people enjoying an ever better lifestyle on a planet with limited resources. From research other people have taken, we can estimate that if mankind as a species lived on rice and beans, we could sustainably maintain a population of about 12 billion people. If, for example, we've consumed food in the way that we do at the moment, that the same proportion of people eating rice and beans and the same portion of people having Western diets and what have you, then the sustainable population drops to about 4 billion. If we allow more people, most people, to have a Western diet, perhaps a bit toned down, we get down to 2 billion people. And then, of course, this is the assumption that all of the Earth's resources are dedicated to sustaining man. I believe that what we should do is actually leave half the planet available for other species. And so where we're looking there is a sustainable population of nearer 2 billion. Getting from our current 8 billion to 2 billion is traumatic, to say the least. And what we've got to do is look at how it's going to happen. So I now go into my conjecture of how the future is going to pan out. The first thing is that it will be dynamic systems that will make the future. It will not be managed. There won't be a UN making everyone eat rice and beans. There won't be a organisation out there, or our politicians won't get together and agree on a sustainable future. As a result, for the most part, what we're going to end up with is different groups in conflict over getting the resources that they want for their lives versus other people. That conflict in resource allocation is what's going to govern, and indeed I believe has been governing, what's been happening in the world for the last 60 years. The struggle over resources has been happening for decades already. When you look at many of the wars, the First World War, the Second World War, the Gulf War, and many others, you'll see that typically it is a fight over resources. It was the Germans wanting access to an empire, to get access to rubber and other things in the First World War. In the Second World War, again, it was access to resources, in particular Japan wanting to get access to energy resources. And so now we're getting to the point where the resource that we will be fighting over is food and water. And indeed, I believe we're already fighting over food and water. If you look at a global map of where there is a stress of population, food and water, typically that is where you will find conflict. The Middle East is a particularly bad example where they have a grossly unsustainable population dependent on waters, much of which are either irregular or come through other resources. In particular in the Middle East, it's the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Eritrea, Yemen. They're very dependent on a monsoon, which is irregular. They've had massive population increase and also a massive temperature increase due to climate change. As a result, there is a fight over those resources. Looking to the future, the places where that food stress is going to occur, it will expand out from the Horn of Africa to more of the Arabian Peninsula and across into northern Africa. It will almost certainly impact Pakistan and Bangladesh. Going further, the Philippines and Indonesia are at risk, and I think it surprises a lot of people that Central America has also got this food resource problem. And finally, completing the circle, you have Nigeria, where the northwest of Nigeria is unsustainable, and progressively there is a line coming through Nigeria going south and east where the sustainability problem is occurring. As I say, when you get a conflict over resources, there is conflict. And it's really quite a well-worn way of humanity working. What happens is a bad player will scapegoat a particular community. Now that scapegoating, it can be by religion, it can be by tribe, it can be by wealth, it can be by almost anything. It doesn't matter. The key thing is that you have a malign player who uses something to polarize society, to enable their group to seek to control the resources of the other group. You can see this again if you look at each of the countries that are in conflict, how a bad player will choose a particular sect within a religion, or a particular religion, or a nationality, things like that. So if you look at the conflicts in the Middle East, in Afghanistan, in Burma, Rohingya, you'll see that polarization happening. That process will happen repeatedly in more and more countries as each country goes into stress. To make things worse is when you have that polarization and the conflict, the ability of that company to feed itself goes down, so it actually exacerbates the problem. And again, we've seen that in all these countries where the conflict actually lowers the food and causes the problems much worse. Sadly, I see this happening ever more internationally. At an individual level, it's not surprising when these resource wars happen that people seek to find somewhere else to do it. So you get mass migrations, the refugee problems. As these conflicts increase, The number of refugees and the likelihood that they'll be accepted is going down very rapidly. We're already seeing a lot of countries limit refugees and limit where they can stay. So if you take the Middle East, for instance, the surrounding countries to Syria are typically keeping the Syrian refugees near the Syrian border and not bringing them in to integrate into their society, because they are close to their sustainability level as well and see the risk. The idea of mass migrations is progressively going to become less and less acceptable to the hosting countries. This again will exacerbate the resource wars and make them ever more lethal. From a Western perspective, again, it's interesting to look at how these things do. Because the West have now got pretty much a sustainable population, or their populations aren't increasing, and the resources that they put into their food is such that, generally speaking, Europe and North America, Australia, New Zealand, they are all actually pretty much internally sustainable. They can grow enough calories to feed their populations. As a result, generally speaking, they will be quite protected from these conflicts. It's only in the places where the countries are unsustainable that these problems will happen. My prediction is, as I say, that these conflicts will happen ever more widely. At the moment, I think the places to worry about are Bangladesh and Pakistan, Nigeria, the whole of North Africa, and the further east you go, the worse it becomes. China is again a different category. It doesn't have a sustainable population. It's got far too many people for what it can feed at the level they want to feed. They're importing massive amounts of food, typically from South America, with some surpluses from America and the West. Their one-child policy will actually get them to a sustainable population relatively quickly, and I think they stand a chance of getting to a sustainable position without too much conflict and problem. Looking at the conflicts as they've been happening over the last 30 years, virtually all of the hunger has been centred on the rural population rather than the urban population. With the massive move of people from the rural space into the mega cities, particularly in the third world, we have yet to see the phenomenon of starvation in a mega city. The closest we've got are the privations that happened in cities in Syria, and also the privations that have happened in the cities in Yemen. However, when you have cities of 10, 20, 50 million people, where the infrastructure to deliver food breaks down, we will have a new phenomenon. I can't predict how that phenomenon will play out, but I'm not optimistic. One of the worries about this scenario of fundamentally the third world going into meltdown is that they may export their conflict. At the moment, I believe the politicians in the developed and world, and I'd include Russia and China in that, are tending to step back rather than step forward in terms of dealing with these conflicts. I think that is probably a good policy. Certainly the idea that Trump has of withdrawing back to America makes some sense. And when the resources in these countries isn't worth the battle to get to them, you can see that they might just step back from all this. That isn't to say that the governments of these countries won't attack or go out to against those countries. And of course, Pakistan, for one, has a nuclear bomb. But biological weapons and chemical weapons are actually pretty easy to manufacture and deploy, especially now that we have drones and technology that makes it much easier to deliver payloads worldwide. So, what we have is, in the next 30 years, a society where the rich countries and the well-managed countries will survive at some level, and some may indeed thrive. But all of the poor countries are going to go into meltdown and have a very torrid time.